I'm going to tie up a favorite little baitfish and sculpin pattern. This is John Barr's Slump Buster. It is named such that it is basically when the fish are being real finicky and they're tough to catch. This fly tends to bring them out of their holes. It's really not much to it. It's all made with pine squirrel. It's a very, very thin body, heavily weighted fly. It's a great fly for casting around rocks and into current seams and drifting down along the bottom as a baitfish or a sculpin imitation. And you can tie this in many different colors and combinations to meet your needs. So that is John Barr's Slump Buster, and I'll go ahead and get started. Before I put my hook in the vise, which is usually the first thing to do when we're starting a fly, the Slump Buster has a gold cone on it. Now, this is gold because that's the scheme I'm going for with the Slump Buster. Copper is also very popular, but you could also even use a black cone or painted cone if that's what you have. So I put the gold cone on here first. This hook is a Mustad R74. Also a 9672 is the older model number. This is a number 6. It is a 4X long streamer hook. You could also use like a TMCO 5263 would work. I'm going to put some lead wraps on this. This is some .020 lead wire. You don't have to do this, but I like to just to give it a little bit of extra weight. Some of the places that I'm fishing this, usually the current is pretty swift. So I put on about 12 extra wraps of some medium-sized lead here just to give it a little bit more weight and get it down. I'm going to add those to the hook shank, and then I'm going to shove those all up in the cavity of that cone. But before I do that, I'm going to place about half a drop of Zap-A-Gap super glue right here on the hook shank, just like that. And then when I push that lead on up into the cone, the super glue will just help to hold it in place. It won't move around, and it'll keep it secured. I'm going to attach my thread. For thread, I'm using a Uni-Thread in a brown color. Camel is what this is called. I'm going to attach my thread right in front of the lead wraps here. Get that anchored onto the hook shank. And then I'm going to put some extra wraps in here for a bit of a thread dam. Remember, I've got that super glue on those lead wraps, so I don't really have to have a lot of thread over this to hold this in place. And we're going to end up putting some more super glue in there, as well as wrapping the pine squirrel zonkers on there, so that'll hold it in place. You get about not quite halfway down the hook shank. Now I'm ready to tie in the body material. The body material that we're going to use is a gold sparkle braid. This is a Wapsi product. It's just a gold sparkle braid. And like I said, if you wanted to do a copper or if you wanted to do a black or something like that, you could use a different color. And I'm using this is a hot yellow Wapsi UTC wire in a brassy size, but a regular gold wire would also work well with this. You can attach these on individually if you want, but just to be a little more expedient, I like to attach both the sparkle braid and the wire at the same time. I'm just going to wrap down in some open spirals down to the back of the end of the shank here, and back and forth a little bit just to secure it. All of this is going to get wrapped over with sparkle braid as well as wire, so it will be very secure. Plus, we're not trying to have a bulky body here. This is going to be fairly thin. So I just wrap them both in at the same time. The rest of the rest of the Slump Buster is actually made with a pine squirrel zonker. This is just a natural pine squirrel. You can get this dyed in other colors. What you want to look for is, especially on a large size hook like this size 6, you want to find a zonker that the hair fibers are fairly long, especially up towards the end of it here, because this is what we're going to wrap on as a bit of a collar. If the hair fibers are a little shorter in the back for the tail, that's fine. You want to take the whole zonker here, and we're going to measure our tail. I just simply measure the hide, and I want the hide to be about a shank length long. And I'll separate the hairs here to open up a space along the hide. Double check my measurements. If it's a little long or a little short, it's up to you. I just use the shank as kind of a guide. I'm going to place that right on top of the hook shank. Get a couple of gentle wraps of thread to collect that in place. And then I'll put about 4 or 5 other wraps to secure that. Doesn't take much. This thread's pretty strong. Folding the zonker back, I'll advance my thread up the hook shank, and I want to stop almost the same width of the cone here behind the cone. This is where we're going to palmer in the zonker strip, so I want to make certain I leave that space open. So we're going to apply our sparkle braid for the body here at this point. I want to take the sparkle braid and I want to put 2 wraps in right behind this tail piece, and what that's going to do for me is it's going to help keep this tail piece from flopping down inside the gap of the hook like this and fouling it up. It's not foolproof, but it does help. Then I'm going to advance my sparkle braid forward and on up the hook shank. Just getting each wrap right in front of the other one. Again, I'm not trying to bulk up for a body here. I simply want to cover up the hook shank with the sparkle braid. And I'll take my pine zonker and I'll separate the hairs where the thread is at, just like that. You want to take care here to make certain you're wrapping that down so that the pine squirrel zonker is on top of the hook shank, not pulled over to one side. Easy to do when you start to wrap that in and get it under some thread tension. Just take your time with it. Once I get about half a dozen wraps in there to secure that, I'll once again fold this back, advance my thread in front. Now I'm ready to put my rib on. Before I do that, I'm going to put in a half hitch right here with my thread to anchor the thread. I'm going to bring my bobbin cradle over. I have found when doing this particular fly, it's kind of difficult to separate the hairs here and get this wire wrapped in and everything else while holding on to this floppy piece of pine squirrel zonker. So I'm going to grab the end of that with my hackle pliers and just drape that over my bobbin cradle. That way this is kind of held out of place while I'm working with this section right here. I'm going to take the wire around. The first time it comes around, I'm going to bring it right over where those rear thread wraps are. Then I'm just going to advance it up the hook shank a little bit at a time. Generally, I get about 4 wraps of this in, and then the last wrap is at the forward thread wraps. Just take your time with it. Again, you don't want to pull the zonker off to one side. Wrap of wire is going to come right up and over where those forward thread wraps are at. Most important thing here is while you're putting in this wire, just make certain you keep tension on it. If you lose tension on it, it'll loosen up and you've got to start all over again. With that in place, I can unclip my zonker, take the bobbin off of the bobbin cradle and move the bobbin cradle out of the way. Now I just need to anchor this wire down. I'll bring it up along my side of the hook. I'll put in a half dozen wraps to anchor that, and then I can twist off the remaining wire. Then I'll wrap my thread right up to the cone. And here's the trick on this Slump Buster with the pine squirrel. What we're going to do, we're going to take some, this is a Loctite brand. It's a super glue, but it's a control gel. You want to take a super glue gel, not the regular, because the gel is going to spread around a little bit as we palmer this on, and it's also going to give you a longer work time. But I'm going to squeeze some of this gel up into the cone. I pretty much want to get a good bit up in there, because as I palmer this around, eventually the zonker strip is going to start going up inside the cone, and that's what's going to hold the head of this together. You want to palmer this around and just gently sweep the hair back out of the way. Try not to get your fingers all in any zap-a-gap, should say super glue. And you might be able to see it, but at this point, as I'm putting wraps of this pine squirrel in, it's actually sliding on up into the cone. And I'm putting that under a little bit of tension. Usually you can get a good 3 to 4 wraps. And that super glue up in there is what's going to hold this all together. I like to just put 1 wrap of thread or maybe 2 over that to hold it in place while I trim off the remaining pine squirrel zonker. That's just going to hold it in place for me to give that gel time to set up. Sometimes you get a tag like this sticking out. You'll have to take your bodkin, some other tool, and just push that on up into that cone. You can twist that cone a little bit, it'll spread some of that glue around. The idea is that you have just the hair coming out from underneath the cone here. There's no thread wraps, there's nothing else. As you can see here, the thread itself is also secured. Sometimes I'll put in just a little half hitch just to hold that a little bit, and then I can trim that off. Once that gel sets up in there, it is rock solid, will not be a problem. So that's the Slump Buster. This is, like I said, the gold Slump Buster. It's a small fly with all that extra weight up here. It is going to turn this over, and it's going to tend to want to swim up, hook point up in the water with just the cone. Sometimes, generally, it does not. Popular colors, as I mentioned, are the copper as well as the black, but you can go with any kind of cone, even a bright orange, maybe a bright orange body. It's up to you. Plus the fact the pine squirrel zonkers you can get dyed in olive colors, in chartreuse, in fluorescent orange, rust crawdad orange, that kind of color. But it's a great little streamer pattern, nice little Sculpin imitation. Hope you enjoyed that. That's the Slump Buster. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.